So there we go. That's
right, everybody, welcome to another wonderful session as part of our free and radical creative online series for radical pioneers. And this amazing session is titled How to Protect Your Own Work by the wonderful Taylor Davies, which I'll shortly just introduce. But I just want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and if anybody's interested, you can turn on the transcription at the bottom by just clicking the transcript button there. And just to introduce myself, my name is Majid. I am one of the non-executive directors of Toady Moon, founder and director of Union of Justice. In a former pastime, I was a politician as well. And just to kind of visually describe myself, I am a black male wearing a beige cap facing forward with a bit of a beard and a grey hoodie. And just before we kick things off, and what I'm going to do is, very briefly, share my screen. I just want to basically let people know about this wonderful, amazing opportunity that we have for people. So as part of Toady Moon is that we've given away £1 million and in funding for basically people to take part in the festival. So as it says here, like get funding to take part in a new creative project and feature in the festival. So literally we're giving up to like £25,000 to make an immersive film. You can make a short film, you can perform, write a play. Literally there's so much amazing opportunities for you all to kind of get involved in. And whether that be for yourself or if you know anybody that might be interested, please do share that with them. Right, where was I? So yes, and just also going to, if anyone wants to ask any questions for it, please do use the chat box feature. And also just kind of just introduce yourselves, let everyone know where in the world you're from. And if I can also just ask all the guests to kind of make sure that they are muted just to kind of minimize any background noise. And now I'm going to hand it over and introduce our wonderful guest, Taylor. And Taylor, if you don't mind visually introducing yourself as well as verbally, and just kind of giving people a bit of a description in terms of what you do. And yeah, I'll basically give it straight to you, buddy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, thanks. Good evening, everyone. So my name's Taylor Davies, and I work at entertainment and media law firm called SHERIDANS. Well, so I thought I'd start by giving you a bit of background about me. So I didn't take your kind of standard route into law by means of, university and, training at a corporate American firm, for example. I consider myself first and foremost a creative. So when I was 13, I played in punk bands in Swansea, where I'm from. So I played on the kind of gig circuit in Swansea. Then at 17, I went to drama school in London. I studied to become an actor. I then I played multiple leads in the West End. And I also played roles in TV and film. And at the same time then, I was recording with my band and touring with my band. I signed to indie labels, to major labels. So I was dropped from both of them as well, which is kind of part and parcel with particularly major labels anyway. And yeah, so I kind of lived that life of being an entertainer or a creative. That's what I consider myself first and foremost, a creative. I think what happened was I started to crave to understand the kind of business aspect of the entertainment world, which is a large proportion. I wanted to understand what happened behind the scenes. So I was on stage as an actor or a musician, but I wanted to know what happened underneath. So I started studying a law degree. I studied my law degree, and I'm now working in an entertainment law firm. And it's kind of surprisingly taken me by surprise because I thoroughly enjoy what I do, and I wasn't expecting that. I suppose my initial idea was to kind of further enhance my creative endeavors. But as I started studying and started training and working at a firm, I realized that maybe this was actually what I was fashioned to do. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. If I can move this next screen. Okay, yes, and I work at SHERIDANS. So SHERIDANS is recognized worldwide as a leading law firm in the creative sector. So we represent leading companies and talent in the entertainment world, from fashion brands to major record labels to film and TV producers, indie record labels, directors, talent, social media influencers. So we advise clients on all matters: intellectual property, licensing, creative industry tax relief, global distribution, general kind of consulting, as we kind of work so closely with the business, consulting people on the next steps and what to do. So as you can see up there, there's a couple of games clients we've worked with: Supermassive, Tequila Works, Sumo Digital. We've worked with Virgin Records, with Sony. These are Fontaines DC that we work closely with. Paul McCartney, we've done stuff for him. Jimmy Page and Idols. As well as Fontaines and Idols, we're really enjoying working with at the moment. So I suppose that gives you an idea of me, how I got into the industry, and a little bit about where I work now with SHERIDANS. So now to get to, I suppose, protection and what the actual, what this is actually about. So, I mean, I was going to ask, does anyone know what intellectual property is? But I mean, as it's virtual, I haven't got that same kind of interaction. I mean, feel free to chip in if you do want to, but if not, I'll just keep firing away. So intellectual properties are, they are products of the mind. So, you know, where creators can be given the right to prevent others from using their inventions, designs, or creations. So intellectual property law, which is what I practice, concerns the legal rights that are associated with protecting these inventions. Now, essentially, intellectual property is your most valuable asset as a creator. You know, your work can end up having considerable value in the future and can even potentially be used for financial collateral. So an easy way, I think, to think about IP is to think of IP as a house. I mean, it's got it in the title, right? Property. Think of it as a house. You can assign your IP. That's essentially the same as selling your IP. You're selling the house. Or you can license your IP, which is the same as renting. So as you would a property. You know, there are businesses such as computer games companies and developers that exist simply to develop IP or even take advantage of it. So the idea is that they'll create something, protect it by your intellectual property, and then they'll never use it. So the idea there is that they just monetize the IP and not the product. So they'll create something, protect it, that will A, prevent someone else from using it, and B, it means they might have the opportunity then to license it to other people, which is obviously monetizing it for them. So they're licensing their IP to other people for cash, essentially. So on that note of monetization, and in order to effectively protect yourself when you create anything, you've got to think about the next step. So what do you do to protect your work? Okay, so intellectual property, these are, I suppose these are the 6 main kind of areas we deal with here at this law firm. So we have copyright, trademarks, passing off, which is a kind of form of unregistered trademarks. We have patents, registered designs, and confidential information. Now today I'll probably focus on copyright, trademarks, and confidential information, because that will run through any business. And I think it's important everyone knows that. I'll also probably touch on a couple of agreements that you can look at that you might come across as a creative in the industry. Okay, so when do you need to think about your IP? So when you create or invent something, that's when you need to think about your IP. This could mean you create a new idea for a game, or you write a script for a new film, or you write a new song. You need to start thinking about it then. You also need to think about it whenever you want to collaborate with others. Now, this is important because we need to be clear from the outset whose idea this is. And it happens all the time where, you know, collaboration is fantastic and it's brilliant, and you don't want to kind of bring in any kind of legal issues at the very beginning because it's creative, right? And as soon as you start bringing in business talk or IP talk, it kind of cuts and underlines, you know, the beauty of creation. But I've seen it time and time again where people collaborate, and then years later the product does extremely well, and then there's that debate of who owns the IP. So if I would give any advice, it would be from the outset, just write something down, a small agreement between the two of you where you clarify who owns what. You also need to think about it when you want to use someone else's work. So in this instance, it will be permission to use the work essentially, and you can do this by way of license. And this is important because a lot of people will use work. Let's say you're doing a 3-minute clip where you're kind of reviewing. I know you were reviewing what was in the news last night. Well, if that does really well on YouTube, are you infringing copyright there? Probably not, because there is such thing as, you know, criticism and review. But these are the kind of things that you need to be careful of when you're using other people's work. Also, in the same token to that, there's when others want to use your work. So if you're aware of your IP rights and other people want to use your work, then you could probably draft some form of license agreement where you can give them the work. But obviously for a, whatever you want, for cash, I suppose. Okay, so let's start with copyright. Now, copyright is a key type of intellectual property, and it subsists in all aspects of the entertainment industry. So copyright arises automatically when a creative work that qualifies for copyright is created. So you don't need to register copyright. Now, you can in the US, you can register copyright, but that just gives you extra protection. But in the UK, you don't register copyright. You're automatically protected as soon as the work is created. And the person who created the work is the owner. I know that sounds fairly obvious, but you know that we have seen disputes with joint authors. So it's always the person that created the work. Now, the work must be original, meaning it needs to originate with the author. And again, this might sound fairly obvious, but there is things with, as I've just mentioned, where people incorporate pre-existing works. So it needs to be original. And is it substantially original? Now, another key point with copyright is that copyright only protects the expression of an idea and not the idea itself. So unless it's written down or it's tangible, you won't be protected via copyright. So let's give an example here. I think that might be the easiest way to explain the expression of an idea. Let's say I'm at the pub with a friend and we're both musicians, and I pick up the guitar and I play to my friend this fantastic new song idea that I have. And nothing's ever spoken. And then a year later, I hear on Radio 1 that same idea that I showed my friend a year ago. Well, unless I've recorded that song and I have proof of that recording, there's nothing I can do. So I've lost that work. It's gone to somebody else because I didn't express the idea. Okay, so an idea isn't protected by copyright. Now, another reason why copyright is attractive is it's a lasting legacy. So some copyrights can last up to 70 years post an author's death. So that can then get passed down to the estate. So it's a really attractive form of intellectual property. So let's give an example of some of the copyright that will subsist. So let's just take a film, for example. So there'll be copyright in the music. There'll be copyright in the script, in the audio visuals, the story, the characters, the art. The art can be protected by artistic design. Even the website design and the software, the underlying software is all protected by copyright. Like I said, there's nothing you need to do to register these rights. This is something you're given through creating a piece of work. But well, I think to look at that slide, there's seven limbs of copyright that has come from one feature film or one short film, for example. So that shows the importance of copyright, of intellectual property that runs through anything that we do. So, I think also as well, if you have copyrighted work that attracts interest from other parties, then it's also worth considering your licensing options as well. So if you created music, for example, then you could license that to a film, for example. There's so many different limbs here in terms of copyright. I think I'll move on from copyright there. Again, if anyone wants to ask further questions on copyright at the end, we can kind of go through that, or feel free to intervene. But I think another important thing that we should look at is trademarks. Now, a trademark can be any sign that identifies you as the owner of the product or the goods or services. It's your badge or your identity card by which customers can find your product. And the owner of a trademark has the exclusive right to use that sign. Now, this is also relevant in terms of the entertainment industry as well. So you look at any labels, the labels will own trademarks to their label. Otherwise, somebody else can just use the brand. So labels will use it. You'll have film production companies that will use it. You'll have video games development companies that will use it. Trademarks will kind of underline the whole kind of industry there. And it's your identity, it's your badge. And think about the Golden Arches, McDonald's, or I'm loving it, which is trademarked. That slogan is trademarked. Or Nike, the Nike tick, for example, and just do it. I'm trying to think of another one. Also, obviously, the Adidas as well. Kit Kat, have a break, have a Kit Kat. These are all trademark slogans, and they're trademark names. And automatically you hear that I'm loving it, and you straight away refer to McDonald's. It kind of that trademark. You know exactly what you're getting when you see that, essentially. So what kind of things can be trademarked? There's the company name, which would be a word, or possibly a logo. So you can have a name, a logo, you can have shapes, patterns, sounds, slogans, as I've just said, I'm loving it, or Nike, just do it. So there's all these different things, and there's many different aspects that can be trademarked. So there's a few things to kind of be aware of as well when thinking about trademarks. So a trademark must be unique. So it cannot be confused for an already registered trademark. And it also cannot be descriptive. So you cannot, for example, call your new trainer brand sports shoes, for example, because that's descriptive of the product, right? So if I'm selling sports shoes and I call my shop sports shoes, or I try to trademark that, it's too descriptive of the product. Likewise, if I called my brand name Pluma, well, that's confusing. That will confuse customers with the brand name Puma. So there's those two elements that you really need to consider when looking at trademarks. And I also want to point out, and this is something that many businesses have told me when I've advised that you should get a trademark in place. Well, some people have turned around and said, well, look, I don't need to get a trademark because I registered my company name via Companies House. Well, that doesn't protect you. Yes, you've got the name via Companies House for accounts and tax purposes, etc. But you don't own the brand name. So even if you do not own that company name via Companies House and you're a limited entity, for example, that's not stopping anybody from using that same brand name. So it's really important to trademark that name as well. Okay. So next, look at confidential information or trade secrets. Now, a trade secret is exactly how it reads. It's a secret in your trade. Now, they are intellectual property rights based on confidential information, and these may be licensed too. Now, trade secrets are defined under the regulations as any information which is a secret, has commercial value, and has been subject to reasonable steps to keep it a secret. Now, the most important part there is that last part of the definition. Now, if you don't take the effort to keep your business, your business's information secret, well, you can't complain because somebody else has stolen it. It's like leaving your car open, for example, and then waking up the next day and complaining that all the valuables in that car are gone. But you've taken no reasonable steps to lock that car, to make sure it's safe. So how can you, what are these reasonable steps that you can do? Well, you can obviously keep clear documentation with dates and clear signs to make sure you know that it's your information. But what you can do is, whenever you work with people or employees, you've got the non-disclosure agreement. Now, this is a legally binding agreement, the non-disclosure agreement, and I think that's important. So if you've got something that's really valuable within your trade and you don't want anybody to explain that to anybody else or use that secret, then a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement is your best route there. Okay, now I think this will be fairly important for a lot of people that end up working as a freelancer. And you'll see this in most contracts. Now, it isn't necessary to do with you taking steps to protect your IP, but we do see a lot of freelancer agreements in the creative industry that deal specifically with IP, and this kind of clause is one. So if you are a freelance contractor, there is a strong chance that you will be asked to sign a work made for hire agreement. And I think it's worth you all knowing what this will entail in the creative industry. Now, work made for hire is it's a means of clarifying who owns the intellectual property rights. So in the context of let's say a video game publisher agreement, for example, then you'll see the work made for hire in your contract. And that will basically be saying that the publisher will want to own all of the developer's IP that they create during this time. So whenever you see a work made for hire clause within your IP contract, it's always worth considering how much of my IP is going. So what do they want? And the answer most of the time will be all of it, because that's the premise of a work made for hire agreement. But I think it's just worth flagging to you there. If you see those words, if you see IP within your agreement and you're worried about your IP going elsewhere, then I would certainly seek legal advice on that one, just to make sure you're not assigning all your IP rights away, if that's not what you want. Okay, so I suppose that's kind of a little overview of intellectual property protection. Like I said, it's such a broad subject, and it could take hours talking about just one element of it. So I hope I'm giving a little brief overview. But finally, I do want to look at something that, I think everyone in the creative industry should be aware of, and it's the creative industry tax relief. So this is nothing to do with IP, but rather a financial incentive that I believe anyone that is creating anything should be aware of. So the creative industry tax relief is a government tax incentive designed to financially support the British entertainment sector. Now, it's administered by HMRC and is part of the creative sector tax relief. So I've seen this in practice as well. Successful certification with something like this could lead to further projects. It's a huge cash incentive that can allow people to continue working and continue creating and continue doing what they love, which is the whole idea behind this tax relief. So basically, if you know, there's 7 main types of tax relief. There's the video games tax relief, film tax relief, R&D tax relief, animation tax relief. And I suppose the idea of it is that it will allow British companies to claim 20% back on their full budgets. And a lot of people don't know about this. So let's say you spent £100,000 on a animation project, for example. Now, if your project is eligible and passes the certification, then that's £20,000 back from that £100,000 spent as a tax rebate. If you're loss making, it's £20,000 back in cash, which you can then pop back into the next project. So you can see why it's an incentive for creatives to continue working. And I really want to make people aware of this because it's a huge incentive to continue creating. On that note, thank you very much. Here's my email. If anyone has any questions or they don't feel comfortable asking anything on here, you're welcome to send me an email.
Brilliant, amazing. Thank you so much for that, Taylor. And wow, where do we start? Guys, feel free to put questions in the question chat box or to raise your hand or whatever. But I've got a question, Taylor. So in terms of, it's one in regards to trademarking, because once you get something trademarked in the UK, correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't cover worldwide. Like, say for example, you're doing something, but then like, well, I know I'm trademarked in the UK, but what about the States or other parts of Europe?
Yeah, you're exactly right there. So you'd have to trademark it by territory. And so, yeah, we'd have a client that would come, let's say, first of all, they're a UK film company, for example. They'll say, look, let's start off with a UK trademark. We'll start with that and we'll build there. And then when you start gaining that reputation elsewhere, you can start looking at trademarking in different territories as well.
So would you advise just to do that first in the UK and start working rather than doing it all at once? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's costly. It's a costly process, right? So I think you're looking at around about £300 to £400 per trademark. And there's also then classes to consider as well. So, for films, you can only you can trademark a territory, and then if you want to do 5 classes, for example, so the classes of trademarks would be where you see a brand would fall under. Is it sports? Is it, TV? Is it this? Some fall under 3 or 4, but that's 3 or 4.
Clothing,
exactly.
Skateboards, yeah, it's just different categories, you're right.
And then that falls under, so if you have 3 or 4 different classes, then that's, that's £1,000 plus, and then you have multiple different territories. So what we tend to do is go for, say, 3 or 4 different classes within the UK, and you build up from there then. And when the company starts gaining popularity abroad, then we can start, looking at trademarks elsewhere then as well.
Great. Just another question, got a question in from Lab, who asks, I would like to hear about open source and Creative Commons. Does that mean anything?
Open source and Creative Commons?
Yeah, I would like to hear about open source and Creative Commons. Do you deal with that at all in your work?
No, I don't deal with that. I don't really do that. I mean, it could be one for the data team. That would be.
Not to worry. Just another question I wanted to ask was, in terms of the 7 categories, it'd be great if you can kind of just go into them, because sometimes some people that make creative content don't fall into digital games or like animation or whatever. So what if you are still creating creative stuff, but it doesn't necessarily fall into the 7 areas?
Do you mean for creative industry tax relief? So there's 7
Yeah,
areas.
that's tax relief.
Yeah, we've got here. So obviously there's the animation, there's the film, there's the video games, etc. You know, if you speak to well, people who are specialised in that subject, they'll be able to find ways around it. In terms of like, let's look at a theatre production, for example. There is theatre tax relief, but let's say we've got something that falls somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit theatre, but there's an element of interactivity there. Right, well, if there's that element of interactivity there, then we might be able to find a way to slot that into video games tax relief, for example. And if not, then you've always got research and development tax relief. I think, you know, as a creative, there'll be ways to argue that a lot of things are, you know, R&D, for example. Now, that needs to be an element of uniqueness there, you know, scientific kind of uniqueness and technological advancement. But, you know, you can find creative ways to try and, you know, to try and argue that case as well. And I think it's always worth speaking to someone who specialises in tax relief then to, you know, with that kind of, with that query or what you actually do to see if you could be eligible for tax relief.
Yeah. And also just got another question from, I got a question from Abdul, and who asks, and you briefly touched upon when freelancers, as freelancers in terms of protecting the web, but what if companies, creative companies are working with freelancers? How do they ensure that those freelancers don't take the rights of the work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's just flipping it on its head, right? So as a freelancer, you'll have an IP assignment essentially. So you'll have your employee contract here. And then maybe number 7 will be a clause for IP. And in that, it says that the employer owns all the IP. So you flip it on the head there, Abdul, and you go, well, if you're the creative agency, for example, well, you'll draw up a contract for the employer, for the employee, sorry. You'll have all that kind of, you know, your standard kind of employment terms there, but you'll also have an IP clause there as well. So you will then make sure that the employee is assigned all the IP back to the creative agency. So that means whatever the employee does for you in that work period while they're working for you, you own all the IP. So that's done by way of contract, essentially. And if that's not there, then it's up for debate. Then, if there's no agreement in place, then
because you know, because sometimes people use these platforms like people per hour, Fiverr, where these. So I guess it's also worth looking into these websites and what contractual agreements that they have with both parties and stuff like that. So I guess it's sort of things that it's worth reading the small prints.
Definitely, yeah. And I know it can be boring, but you know, if you get to the kind of crux of it, which is the IP, right? You know, that is the most important thing that you should be looking at. If you're a creator and you create anything, you know, when you're looking at a contract, I think the main thing that people do is they get a contract through and they skip straight to the fees part. How much am I getting paid? I think as a creative, you need to be going, I'm going straight to the intellectual property part. Because
that's the most important.
That's my work, you know?
Do you know, Taylor, like, what about, do you know, there'll be some creators out there that be thinking, well, is it even possible to get this piece of wording and like protected at all? Because how do I know somebody else isn't using it elsewhere? How do I know somebody may come for me like 10 years down the line or whatever? Do you know what I'm saying? So are there some things that are just really difficult to protect without being like words, sayings? Is there certain things that are like, it's just too difficult?
There are. I mean, there's a bit of a battle at the moment with fashion. So, you know, like people churn out so many things in the fashion industry that it's difficult to protect a design in fashion. So there's a lot of issues at the moment with fashion, and you know what's you know, one of the things with copyright is originality. Now, in fashion, let's say you've got a pair of tracksuit bottoms. Well, it's happened so many times. Well, how do you keep finding ways to make that original, right?
So I guess even like, say for example, when Kappa came out with, you know, the poppers, those tracksuits where the little buttons where you can just pop them open.
Yeah.
Like, could somebody, for example, trademark that design, the popping of like the, and then somebody else was to do it later on, they'd be like, wait a minute, that's
so
our thing.
What you would do with that, I think the fashion brands, the main thing that what they've done is they've really leant on trademarks. So with Kappa, what they would have done, they could go for a registered design in fashion for the poppers. But what fashion is, you'll see the huge battles with Coco Chanel and different designers because they've all gone for a trademark. They've gone for a logo. And that's the only thing that can distinguish them, really, because, you know, there's only so many pairs of jeans you can make. But if it's got that logo on there, that Nike logo, or that, you know, Coco Chanel logo, then that's what distinguishes it from anything else. So I think that's, you know, that's difficult. But I think with the copyright as well, to go back to what you were saying about, you know, what's to say that someone, say you've written a song, and you've released the song, and it's doing really well, and then a year later, someone comes to you and says, I actually wrote that song 20 years ago.
And it's an honest thing where you actually just didn't even like, but I guess you could have been inspired, but sorry, continue.
Yeah, but I mean, he can do that essentially, but then your response back to that would be, well, prove it. And that's back to what I'm saying with like copyright doesn't protect an idea. It only protects the expression of an idea. So if this gentleman then can turn around to you and go, he can pull a recording out from Logic or GarageBand and know that he's recorded this 20 years ago on this date, and he has, you know, it's tangible, then there might be some sort of copyright infringement case going on. But if he hasn't got that tangible evidence, then there's nothing he can do.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Do you know, there's been a couple of cases where you've had well-known major artists, even like record labels, whatever, that they may steal a hook or a rhythm or something from unknown internet artists that they kind of just scout from the internet. Or it could be like a part of a beat or whatever. Say if you're an emerging artist and you're like, wait a minute, I've got my song on SoundCloud and it sounds very familiar when I was speaking to this A&R person, and that you can kind of link it like, wait a minute, they've actually ripped off my song or my melody or whatever. Can somebody like that go against a giant like Atlantic Records, for example? Like, what can they do?
It's difficult. But again, you know, let's go back to that point of, if you've got that tangible evidence that you created this song prior, if you can also show that a substantial part of that song was copied, then, you know, you could be in for a good case. But then the likelihood of that going to courts would be, you know, non-existent. You know, if there is some sort of copyright dispute there, then it probably gets settled outside of court by financial rewards or you know, something along the lines of that. But yeah, there's certainly, you know, if you've got a clear case and evidence of that, then certainly, you know, you would certainly have the right to do it. But I think the other issue there is it doesn't happen as much because lawyers cost fees, right? So
yeah, exactly.
But you've got Atlantic, who can afford the best lawyers in the UK or the world, and then you've got, you know, somebody who's creating stuff in GarageBand in his room who's like got no money, so I can't afford any lawyers, and that's where it becomes difficult. Then it's a financial game then, which is unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
And then it just ends up being a pub story you tell your mates that they don't end up believing you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Could I ask something?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how about, you know, like at the moment, people are making a lot of things like machine learning projects where they collect thousands of images online, or they have to create a body of images and then they use those images for something. I mean, do you know much about that? Like how? I
love that question because it's like it really baffles us as well. So it's still kind of, you know, it's AI protected works essentially. So who owns the copyright in an AI protected work? And it's really interesting. And it's like, this one brings up loads of kind of moral issues as well. So let's say if you've got someone who's designed this piece of technology, as you mentioned, this technology then creates 2,000 paintings. So you've got this poor painter. He can only do one painting every 6 months by himself, and this AI machine then can do 2,000 paintings a day. One, it's going to lose business for this guy over here, which morally is that right? This guy's churning out, this AI machine's churning out 2,000 paintings per day. And then secondly, the AI can't own the rights because, well, they can't represent themselves in court, so they can't own the rights there. But then is it morally fair for the creator of this machine to own 2,000 paintings that are being churned out every day that can be sold for X amount of cash? I think, it's still the answer still isn't quite clear, and there's a lot of people debating this at the moment. For me, the only answer is regulation. But then again, is that going to kill incentive, right? Is that going to kill kind of technological advancements and stuff like that? So there needs to be some form of middle ground, I think, where we find out the answer to this. But it's a really interesting question, because as you said, it's, when we think about copyright, the creator or the author of the work. So the whole idea behind copyright is the creator of that work owns the copyright. Well, the AI can't own it, and the AI is technically the creator. So we'd have to really go back to the copyright principle to begin with then. So there'll have to be a lot of changes to the regulations, and I think regulating advancement of AI and ownership there as well. It's a really interesting question, but I still think it's being curbed at the moment. There's been a few guys that have done it. There's one guy that's released an album from it, but he did it as an experiment, just to go, look, I can create this album. I think there was one guy recently who created every single song and chords progression that could ever be. Now, if we're talking about copyright infringement here and who owns it, well, if you've got this one guy who's created everything by clicking a button and he owns everything, well, that kills creativity. That means nobody else can write anything ever again because one guy owns everything. So that's why it needs to be regulated. Otherwise, there'll be no room for any artist to do anything.
Just on that note, and I know now that we've left the European Union, but I'm sure you would have come across Article 13, which is that kind of controversial piece of copyright legislation. Yeah. I think now they're called Article 17, which some people might know as the meme ban, basically. But now that I guess is there certain things like that now that we're no longer part of the European Union? Has that freed us up from certain legislation? I don't know, has that made a big impact in terms of copyright legislation in the UK?
I'd say no at the moment. We're still really coming out of it. But we've got our own, the CDPA, which is the UK regulation for copyright. We've got Trademarks Act in the UK as well. So we kind of really rely on UK law, and we do rely on EU law as well. But at the moment, there's been no kind of big change there. But that is something we're all kind of on the edge of our seats waiting for. So yeah, I'm sure there will be some changes coming shortly. But yeah, no major kind of change as of yet. It almost feels like everything is kind of still flowing the way it was.
No worries. We've got a question from Hania Lange, apologies if I'm butchering your surname, which I'll also add on to. She goes, how does the copyright work with being a YouTuber and creating content? And I also just want to kind of add on to that, also using the platform, for example, Instagram, where I guess Instagram, you publishing your own content onto the platform. And there was that kind of famous case by the artist Richard Prince, who kind of sparked a bit of controversy when he took Instagram photos from random people. One of the Instagram took photos without their permission and basically making like really extreme, I think, small edits of it, and then basically put it up on a gallery and sold it for $100,000. And they were like, can you imagine the pictures that you put on your Instagram? Somebody just taking that, putting it on exhibition and selling it for $100,000 or whatever. But it's like, yeah, how does copyright work in terms of like when you're putting content on YouTube and Instagram and those kind of platforms?
Look, it goes back to what I was saying about copyright there as well. From the beginning, you know, is the work substantially yours? Is it original? And if it is, and you're putting work on YouTube or Instagram, then it's your work that you own, right? So this is you know, just because you post it on Instagram or YouTube, it doesn't mean that YouTube own it or Instagram own it.
Just on that very quickly, Taylor, what if somebody was to just change the layout, like change the filter, put a filter, just slightly change it? Does that then change the expression because it's no longer your intended expression? It's just.
I mean, it's all subjective, but for me, you know, looking at the law, that, you know, is it substantially different? Is what you have to ask yourself, and that was the thing with the Prince case as well. So it's like, it's originality, and is it substantially different? And for me, changing a filter, no, that wouldn't be the case. There was a famous case actually. I can't remember the name of it, but it was the red bus. Remember the kind of old London red bus? Sorry, you know, the red buses now. There's a famous picture there where the bus is in red and everything else is black and white in the background. It's kind of a famous London photograph.
Yeah.
Well, that was under dispute because somebody else had taken the photo and they made it black and white in the background and made the bus in red. So that's what we changed the filters and kind of added a little bit, but it wasn't substantially different. So again, that's what it is. But there are ways around it. So the ways around it is that you look at something called the fair use principle, and that's for stuff like parodies. So you'll see a lot of films, TV series, or YouTube clips, for example, where they might mimic somebody. So they might put
and they'll do a cover to get around it. I've noticed.
Exactly. So if you can make it a parody, caricature, then there's a way around copyright there. There's also a way around copyright for criticism and review. So let's say if you've got a film up and you pop it on YouTube, but you're kind of in the bottom reviewing the film. You go, well, look, I didn't like this bit because of X, Y, and Z. This bit wasn't right. Well, that's criticism and review. So you can use that copyright there because it wouldn't be infringement. But let's say if you just watch a film, you like it, and you just put it all to black and white and then upload it. Well, that's infringement in my eyes.
Yeah. Just got a question in from Sarah, who asks, now that with the world moving so rapidly with new technologies like blockchain and NFTs, what does that necessarily mean for artists? Or how can artists protect themselves from future and copyright? Like, yes, I don't know if there's like, just to kind of elaborate, there's been things that have just basically been moving so quickly where it's like digital art where people are like selling JPEGs over, but like, yeah, is there ways for current artists or creators that they can do now that they would be thankful for in 20 years time, in 10 years time kind of thing? Even probably less than that.
Get into NFTs.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, it's we've got you know,
it must be different, you know, in your work at Sheridan's, things just change so quickly. I'm sure for you guys, you're always having to learn new stuff and it's just trying to get your head around things.
Absolutely. And I think it's up to you whether you embrace it or not. And for me, NFTs have come along and I've kind of taken a back seat in NFTs, and I've just gone, well, this is a whole new world that I don't really want to get into at the moment. I suppose in that we had a specialist that works with me, one of my colleagues, and he's a specialist in NFTs. So he's a blockchain NFT specialist, and his entire practice is built on NFTs. But he's been playing the game for a few years with NFTs. So I really think, he sees a prospect in it, and I certainly think there is that, a prospect there, but particularly as well because there's IP there, right? There's IP in the NFT. So I think in terms of protection now, back to the original question, there's still protection there. It's just it's finding out ways to protect yourself. So to speak with someone like my colleague, who's, you know, an NFT specialist who can protect the underlying idea there. It's just finding new ways to protect. So yeah, you wouldn't have your kind of standard kind of copyright, and I mean, it will be copyright there, but you wouldn't have your standard kind of trademarks and stuff like that, but there'd be other ways to protect it. And that's the way the kind of world's moving, right? We've got to kind of find new ways to look at protection. But yeah, it's a really good question. And we're doing a lot of NFTs. There's a lot of clients that come to me and they say, look, yeah, I want to look at this NFT thing. I go speak to that dude there. But you know, I suppose that's why you have this kind of firm, because you have people that specialize in different areas, people who are good at different things, right? Yeah.
Just one final quick question: are you seeing any, in terms of, you know, the work that's coming through through SHERIDANS? Is there any trends that you're seeing, like currently, that are like, there's a lot of cases in this area that we've seen at the moment, kind of thing? Is there any kind of like inside data or anything like that you can share with us?
I think, you know, we have a lot of kind of high profile clients that come through the door, and the idea with entertainment or IP is you don't go to court. So there is there is no precedent. You'll find stuff like, if you're looking at copyright cases, you mentioned the Prince case earlier. I mean, that's years old, that case is now. It's years and years and years old. And like trying to find kind of recent cases, it's quite difficult, because you've got these media and entertainment law firms that all they want to do is not go to court. So you find steps prior to that to protect yourself. And that's via kind of IP agreements, licensing agreements. You know, when we're looking at an agreement for goods or services, or where you're offering services, we'll protect the client as much as we can. And the idea then is that that doesn't go to court. And I think that will happen kind of across the board. So you'll find a lot of people don't do that. I suppose in terms of trends, there's a lot of NFT work coming through at the moment. So I think a lot of people are kind of rushing to do that. Video games has been really, really, really big in our sector at the moment. And I think that's linked to lockdown. So obviously you had the film and TV industry that kind of went kaput. Music, I really like working in music. It's one of my passions that I love to do. And I love to kind of advise people in music as well. So it was a bit hard for me during lockdown, because that will shut down as well. So we kind of turned to video games then. So that was a really kind of, you know, it was big at our firm throughout lockdown. But hopefully the world's coming back to normal again. Well, I say that after last night's announcement. It might be back. But yeah, so that's kind of the main trend. Really, video games, animation's gone really big. NFTs have gone really big. But music and TV and film have really been picking up again in the last few months. So let's hope it stays that way as well.
Definitely. Well, honestly, we could keep asking you questions all day long. So thank you so much, and for everything that you've taught us. And we can't wait to share this with all our networks. We'll be sharing it. So yeah, so much to learn and so much to take away. So thank you so much. And
thank you very much.
No, the pleasure, and it's all ours. Thank you very much, and guys, everyone that joined us today. And just want to give Taylor Davies a massive round of applause. Thank you so much, buddy.
Pleasure.
I don't know if you're still at work. It looks like you're probably still at work.
Still am, but I think I'm going to leave now.
Definitely. Thank you very much, buddy. Have a wonderful day. And
pleasure. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.